Because it looks like it's rolled down now.
Well, thank you for that advice. Oh, Mike, I'm ready to record. All right. Any of you in my daytime 243 class? Did you see me earlier today? Okay. Because I would, yeah, right. Now, I'm going to go over a similar example I went over that time. Sometimes it's good to go over the same example in two different contexts, and sometimes it's boring then. You know, I guess it depends on the situation.
What's 243?
Web database integration.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I have a good example of
What's that?
there's an anti-cut that is not complete.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're trying to make everyone pay.
Okay.
For what? For their applications?
I just put a sign on my phone that says no stealing allowed. Usually keep criminals out.
Right. Right. Exactly. All right. I don't know how we got onto that, but all right. What we're going to do is, one of the lessons last time, if I remember right, was the idea that code that works isn't good code necessarily. Code that works is like the starting point of good code. What makes a code really good is the fact how maintainable it is, how fault tolerant it is, like what happens if something goes wrong, what happens if you can't connect to the web or to the database or something, what happens if the user puts in bogus input, you know. Maintainability certainly does. In other words, if I want to go and change the app, how much work is it to change the app? And reusability is related to that as well. So is there a way that I can build components that I could take advantage of in other situations? All right, that's the idea of reusability. And then we get into things like, you know, the user interface. Is the user interface, you know, attractive? Does it help support the application's mission, and so on and so forth? So what we're going to do, I was going to go over Deedle's tip calculator, but I had enough tip calculating for a while. So we're going to go over a simple dice game. And I wrote the UI for it, but I didn't write the guts of it, the guts of the game. This game is called high-low. Okay? You take two dice and you roll them. Well, before you do that, you predict whether the dice roll is going to be low, 7, or high. Low is anything 2 to 6. So if the two dice add up to 2 to 6, that's low. 7 is 7, of course. And then finally, high is 8 through 12. All right? And you get paid even money if you pick low or high. You get paid 4 to 1 if you pick 7 and it's a 7. A quick glance at the probability of the situation tells you that you are doomed in this game, of course, as you are with all games of chance like this. You know, the odds are stacked against you. But what I want to do is this is a good example to show a couple of things. First of all, I have just the UI portion of it done. All right? So the UI portion will allow us to review some of the concepts that we've seen so far. In other words, creating the views, creating the code, the activity that actually ties the views on the UI with certain behavior. All right? So this will be a review of the stuff that we've done so far. And then we can sort of work together and talk through how to make this work. Then what we will probably do next week, And we have class on Tuesday. We don't get off for Labor Day on Tuesday. So yeah, we'll have class on Tuesday. What we'll do on Tuesday, probably, and we might start this today, depending on how it goes, is we're going to refactor it. That is, we're going to look at it and say, how can we make this better? Better being defined by the criteria largely for our purposes of maintainability and reusability. In other words, let's say I have a company that was making a dice game like this. I might want to make a bunch of simple dice games. Therefore, certain code that relates to one die or a pair of dice, perhaps, I wouldn't want to have redundant in several different places. I'd want everything put in one place. Yes?
If I remember correctly, we did different steps along the way.
Yes.
We made the game first, and we added animation to it.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about like throwing in some form of like version control feature? Like to teach like the development process and keeping things and stuff like that, or do you not have time?
Really good point. I'll have to give that some thought. I don't have an answer off the top of my head on that.
When I was like interviewing for jobs, like, the number one question is how are you with version control? And I had never used it.
Right.
I never took anything.
Right. That is an issue, and that's especially an issue when you start talking about larger projects where multiple people are working on them.
Yeah.
You know, if you're writing the code, then, you know, the version control is, well, you're smart enough to keep track of what things are going on and all that.
Yeah.
But then when you start getting into that, so that's a good question. I'll have to think about integrating that. Yes?
It helps pretty.
Yes?
Yesterday you mentioned
Huh?
and unit testing.
Yes.
Are you able to do that? The file and do it through the
Are you asking for this class or for?
this class where we wanted to unit testing.
Well, for this class, we would unit test it by going in and we have the UI right from the start. So we can test the code right from the UI without doing that. Unit testing we would do there, you probably could go and create it and compile it, but I would probably like we did it do in the Java class if I wanted to do that sort, yeah. And you might be able to do it in Eclipse, I'm not really sure. Let me run this and show you how it behaves, and then we will look at the code for it. So let me go and run it. Of course. All right, here's what we have. A minute. We have a spin control that allows the user to pick whether they think it's 7 or high. All right. We have a play and play. We roll the dice, and it rolls them, and it shows the results of the two die. All right. So that's the behavior we have so far. We don't have the behavior of betting. All right. We don't have the behavior of if saying if you won or lost, or saying if how much money you have or whatever like that. But we can add that in. So we have the UI, the rules of the game. All right, and we'll talk about the game later. I don't understand the question. Yes, we will. I want to turn off my phone because it is annoying. Yeah. There, yes. What class we have today?
It's a Monday.
It's a Monday. All right. To answer your question, we haven't gotten that far yet to answer your question. But actually, to answer the question, there are two image views, and those image views dynamically get set with the proper image. All right. So let's look at code for this, and let's start out. I have a new piece here. All right. I don't know if I have anything in it, but I have actually I have a little bit in it, but not much. We've all strings XML. We now have a dimensions XML and a style XML. And this allows you to customize the style, certain aspects of the appearance, the color, and so on. Of things, again, with the resource qualifier. Notice that we have, on the values, we have 3 resource qualifiers. We have version 11 and version 14. So we have slightly different styles if depending on the version of Android it's running. All right. We then have different dimensions if the width of it is bigger than 820 dp. All right. I don't think for the most part, I did anything with the dimensions and styles. So I'll mention those, but we're going to focus on the strings. Right. Remember, those are the list of resource qualifiers. The resource qualifiers that you have are predefined. Just like we see up here, HDPI, that means high density. LDPI, low density, and so on. Or the example we saw earlier where we had a French resource qualifier -FR. All right. Those are predefined. It's not like I can make up my own suffix to tack onto the end of the folder and expect the Android system to understand what I'm trying to say and all that. So. That's a good question. I'm not sure. My guess is that it wouldn't yell at you. It just wouldn't work. So if I wanted to do FR for French and I did FA, for example, if I typoed, all right, then it just wouldn't apply because it doesn't know what FA means. Pardon me? It would never have the instance where it would look like that. And again, and we can see a list of these. I think I showed this before. Well, there are menu, layout, the resources names. The resource under what circumstances do these resources apply? So this means support. That shows you some of them. I think the other one is the one I want. If we scroll down here, Yeah, this shows you like all you can base it by. The mobile country code, language and regions, layout direction, and so on. Smallest width, available width, screen size, screen aspect, round screen, screen orientation, UI mode, night and day mode, and so on and so forth. So yeah, these are predefined. The resources and the resource qualifiers are predefined for us to do that. And the nice thing is, again, when you go into either Eclipse or Android Studio and you create it, it gives you some of these for free. Like, I don't think any of these, like, did I create, but it gave me them just in case I want to put something in them. No. All right. The XML really contains a handful of strings. Really nothing interesting there. We have the app name, we have action settings, we have play, that's the label of the button, make choice, the array for our spinner control, and so on. So nothing drastically different than we had in any of the other class examples that we went over. If we look at our layout, we'll go and look, and this is a simple layout. I'll bring this into text edit so that we can see it. It is a linear layout, which means that one control simply goes on top. We have and spinner, or something like that. I think I got the order wrong. All right. Notice that underneath the padding, I'm pulling from a resource file. Activity vertical margin, activity horizontal margin, and all that. That again allows us to put that in a resource file so that we can more easily change it. All right, so we could keep our activities consistent, so that we can write resource qualifiers so that for big screens we do one thing, for little screens we do something else, and so on. Image, yes? Mm-hmm. That is the namespace. What does the XMLNS tools attribute mean? I could not tell you off the top of my head. Stands for XML namespace. And what it's saying is a namespace for the tools. But what do we mean by this context? I don't know. What is the meaning of L tools? It's a defined namespace for the document. All right. Again, that's what the above shows too. So it must be two namespaces that this document needs. It is. Anytime you have a namespace, you're saying like, these are the rules that apply. The rules, and again, it allows us to differentiate between different rules and things such as that.
Can we ask what that is?
Yes. You would have to put it in yourself.
Last line of the
Yes. And again, that's the activity that activity class that we are doing. All right. Here's our two image views for the two die. All right. Thank you. Notice that I do an at plus ID. And I add the ID of dice 1, dice 2. That is giving these controls those particular IDs. Yeah, product placement, exactly. There's my spinner control with the layout name and all that. I'm telling it that the entries come from that array, and the prompt comes from make choice. And then finally I have my button that goes and plays things. So GUI-wise, this is pretty simple. All right, GUI-wise, this is pretty simple. It's a linear layout, which means that one thing just flows one right after another. And I don't do any nesting of the layouts. I don't have, like, for example, another linear layout nested within that. I could do that, for example, if I wanted the dice to appear side by side. I could have the first component of my vertical linear layout be another linear layout which put the dice right next to each other. And that one would be oriented horizontally. So again, you can sort of nest these things into that. Yes? I don't know, but I don't want to do that right now. All right? That, do keep in mind, by all means, you know, this example I can put out there. I can put out there and, you know, have at it, going and making changes and playing around and experimenting with some of the things that I mentioned but don't cover in class. So we'll save that. Pardon me?
I like to put all examples.
Yeah, yeah.
The more information, the better.
Yeah, exactly. So if we have time today, or if we have time next time, we can do that. But there's other things that I want to get to prior to that. All right. So there's our XML. Whoops. We did not look at the manifest. But the manifest, if I am not mistaken, doesn't really have anything terribly interesting in this. Pretty similar to the stuff we saw before. The drawables are not, but the other ones are. So drawables are just image files. But like the other ones, the layout file, the menu, the values, the dimensions, the style, and all that, those are in XML, as is the manifest. All right, here's our main activity. It's actually relatively straightforward. There's my package. All right. I'm importing the basic things that we have imported before, as well as I'm importing Java random. This actually is a slightly different way of generating a random number than we talked about in the Java class, for those of you that are taking the Java class. But 6 of one, half dozen of the other. All right. Our main activity extends action bar activity. All right. That's a little different than we had before. All right. Now on the inheritance tree, this is still an activity, right? It's just an action bar activity, which is a specific kind of activity. All right. So if we were talking about inheritance, there's my main activity, which is extending action bar activity, and action bar activity extends plain old activity. What's the difference between that? At a certain point, we lost a menu button on the Android device. All right? There used to be a button to get to the application's menu. Well, it could be a hardware button, but a button built into the Android framework. that went away. What often is done now is a menu is put up here where you touch that up there. And so this gives an action bar. So it's a slightly different activity. It's a slightly different way of handling the menu. Let me bring up another app and we'll see. Might be hard to see, but this is an old style activity. This is Deedle's tip calculator. All right, tip calculator like that. Let's go and bring up the dice game. Notice how there's like a lot bigger space up there on the action bar. And we can put menus and other stuff up there. So action bar activities started coming in when the button went away to pop up the menu. All right. Other than that, it is going to work the same. And all the things that I said about activities would also apply to this. All right. Yes. All right, we have our onCreate method. All right, we are overriding the onCreate method of the activity, right? The first thing we do in it, of course, is we call super onCreate. Because remember, we want to make sure that all the code in the ancestors onCreate gets fired off as well. All right? So we put super onCreate, the first line of code there. We did not put it there. It would not execute the ancestors because when we inherit a class from another class, the methods are overridden. All right? We're not like appending to the method. So this effectively lets us append to the method. Tells it to go and do everything the ancestors do when an activity is created, plus do this stuff specific to our activity. All right? Set content view r.layout.main. What does that do? Well, that makes the main XML that we looked at before in the layout for resources. It makes the main XML for this activity that layout. So in the resources, in layout, uses this XML file. Button, P equals parentheses button. Find view by ID, r.id.button play. We spent a pretty good amount of time talking about that last time, but it's a real important sort of instruction. This is what hooks the objects that get created when we do this. All right? This effectively is bringing our XML to life. Right? The XML in that resource file is a description of what a screen is going to look like. All right? So it's a description of what objects are going to be contained on that screen. When we set the content view to that, we're actually bringing it to life, and we're creating all those objects. Well, we have those objects out there created. We want to do something with those objects. All right? In other words, when they press a button, we want something to happen. All right? And we want to access the value of the spinner, and so on. That's why we're going to have instructions like this. I create a variable of type button. I call the find view by ID, and I give it the ID being what was defined in the XML file for the button. Right here. And then I cast it to button. All right? What does it mean to say I cast it to button? I tell the compiler, hey, I know this is a button, and I want to treat it like a button. Because find view by ID simply finds any view. Find view by ID doesn't know what view it finds. It just finds a view. All right? For us to treat it like a button, though, we have to tell it to treat it like a button. Yes?
What actually declares it as a button? The cat will technically be button.
Well,
Can you cast a button into a text view? Because I think the first one is references it as what it is, the object type, and the other one.
okay.
What actually makes it a button?
What makes it a button,
I thought you could create buttons, but then cast it as like an image view. The image view would be treated as a button.
no. No. Remember that we can only cast it to a button if in fact it really is a button. All right? Or something that inherits from button. So if this were an image view, let's say here, and we tried to cast that image view to a button, or the other way around, at runtime it's going to blow up. Because it's going to say, hey, you told me to treat this like a button, but it's not a button. It's a image view. And therefore it's going to blow up, and it will blow up at runtime. So what makes it a button? Let's talk about all the pieces that go together to make it into a button. Number one is defining our XML as a button. So that's what actually creates a button on our screen. Here, I'm storing it into a variable of type button. This allows me to treat it as a button. All right? I could syntactically this is correct, right? But what's wrong with that? P no longer realizes it's a button, so I can't do buttony things to it. Okay? Now, this might even be correct. I believe this would be correct. Because I could treat it, I could tell it to put in a button in this view, but that probably would work. To do it, I could not do this though, because it can't take something that would be a button and make an image view out of it. All right? I need the name of a variable. I need a name of the variable. In this case, this variable is a play button. So I call the name of the variable that stores the play button P. All right? Remember, this is, we covered this in one of the lectures. I don't remember which one. This is the equivalent of saying that. All right? So this one line is simply a shorthand to do these two things. I need the button in parentheses, yes. Because this is going to give me a view. And I have to tell it that that view is a button so that I can put it into, because you can't put a view into a button because some views are not buttons. So I have to tell it, I know this is a button, therefore I'm going to cast it as such. As far as intuitive, I don't know. Is it? You guys tell me. Is any programming intuitive? Does anyone come out and after being born and know how to program? No. So no, it's not intuitive. It's learned. All right. Keep in mind we could have a bunch of buttons on this page. All right. That's why we declare a variable for them. And we could do different things depending on which button is pressed. So I could have I have a play button, let's say. I could have a reset button that starts the whole game over. I could have a go to a different dice game button. I could have a bunch of buttons on this page. Each one of them has its own role and does its own functionality. In which case I would need a variable for each one of them because I don't want to handle all my buttons the same. I want to handle this button that way, this other button some other way, and so on. So, this is one of those things that, yeah, right. See, heard me talking about casting a button to a view or something like that, or a view to a button. This is one of those things that if it's shaky exactly what this does and how it works, that's okay. Just like remember what you have to do. And what you have to do is a variable type, that's the type of view it is, variable equals that data type, find view by ID, and that. Okay? So even if you don't know exactly how that works, in a nutshell, that allows us to point to something on our screen and treat it as a button is the bottom line of what that does. Yes?
I don't know that. The previous program, the other structures have meaningful. How we name our variables?
Not really, no. No. I mean, it's a good practice, but, you know, yeah, it's not something I stress. All right. So at this point of the code, we have a variable called P that is tied to, that is pointing to that button on that screen. Now, we're going to say p.setOnClickListener this. All right? What does that statement imply as far as interfaces go? Well, yeah, the button's going to do something. But as far as interfaces, we talk about interfaces and implementing interfaces. What does that statement imply? Yes? Right. When the button is clicked, we're going to those events or those methods associated with the click listener, which is the onClick event, is going to run. And what in this problem implements the Onclicklistener interface? This does. Well, what is this? Well, this class. So if we look at this class, this tells me take this object and use it in the role of the Onclicklistener. I can only do that if this class, this main activity class that I've created, implements the Onclicklistener. All right? If I go and take that out, boom, we get an error. All right? Why? Because I can't tell that button that this object is going to handle the onClick because this is not defined as an onClick listener. It doesn't implement the onClick interface. So if I put it back in, then we're back to normal.
You mentioned you can implement one.
Yes. Yeah, I think comma and the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. I think, yeah, just strung together by commas, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I don't, yeah. Implements, and yeah, then you have a list of things it implements. I believe, anyhow. It's been a while since I did that. Now, the other thing, if I were to scroll up and show you this part, What does this line imply? This line implies that there is an on-click method associated with this class. And sure enough, there is. Because if there wasn't, we get an error. All right? What error do we get? It's going to say that it does not implement the Onclicklistener on-click event. So to review this, buttons need listeners to handle the clicking of them. All right? It would not have to be. All right? I probably would do it that way, but it would be possible to have multiple on-click listeners, or I'm sorry, one on-click listener handling multiple things. All right? The listener then would just have to be smart enough to figure out which button got pressed to do the correct thing. All right? So hold that thought. We'll come back to that in a minute here. Buttons need listeners to respond to when they're clicked and to execute some code. Those listeners must be of type onClick. All right? I can make the same class that is my activity serve in the role of the onClick listener. Any class can be an onClick listener. All it has to do is implement the Onclicklistener interface. All right? So in this case, I made my activity also serve in the role of that button's Onclicklistener. All right? So I can do this statement. P on set Onclicklistener this. So making this activity be the Onclicklistener for that button. I can do that because it implements the Onclicklistener. However, if it implements the Onclicklistener, it has to have the onClick method associated with it. All right? So again, I've set the listener to something. I'm setting it to this class. So this class is going to handle the clicking of its button. This class is able to do that because I've defined it as being able to fill that role. Think of interface. When I say an interface, when I say something implements an interface, I'm saying this is able to serve in this capacity. This is able to fill this role. And in this case, I'm saying that this main activity class is able to serve the role of an onClick listener. Okay? So, I can then set the onClick listener of the button to this object. Now, with, what's it say? With great power comes great responsibility. The power to serve the role of an onClick listener comes with the responsibility of having defined within it an onClick method. All right? So if I don't make it, if I don't set it as implementing that interface, then I can't do this. Because I haven't said that it can serve in that role. If I say it serves in that role, then I can do this. However, I also have to have an onClick method because that's the code that's going to get run. Now, to the question that was asked a few minutes ago about one button serving as the onClick listener for a couple of buttons, or one listener serving the role of a listener for a couple of buttons, yes, it can. Because that onClick listener gets passed in as an argument the control that got clicked, the view that got clicked. All right? So we could have some sort of if statement based on this argument to determine, hey, button A got clicked or button B got clicked. That being said, well, I don't know. No, I'm not even going to say that. I was going to say most of the time I'd give each button its own onClick listener. But I suppose you could do it a couple different ways depending on that, and that would be reasonable. Okay. So we're here. We're in the on-click listener. So what happens when it's clicked? Well, if you think about what happens when it's clicked, what do we want to do? We want to roll the 2 dice, right? So what does that entail? That entails getting a random number between 1 and 6. And this is one way to do it. There are other ways to do it. That will give me a random number between 1 and 6. This part will give me a random number from 0 to 5. Then I add 1 to it. It will give me a random number from 1 to 6. I could probably do this, and it would have the same effect. That would give me an integer between 1 and 6. All right. I then grab pointers to the 2 image views on the page, on the screen. And these are essentially the same instruction as this, except I'm grabbing pointers to image views. I'm creating 2 variables, one called dice1 and one called dice2. Each of them are image views. They correspond to the image views that are in my XML file. Whoops. The 2 image views here, dice1, dice2. There would be an alternate way to do the same thing. That would give the same effect of giving me a random number between 1 and 6. Here, I'm doing essentially the same thing I did above. I'm grabbing pointers to those images because I want to do something to those images. When I roll the dice, I actually want to look at and substitute the proper image for that image view. So in order to do that, I have to be able to have a variable that points to each of those 2 image views. And again, the logic is the same. Find view by ID, r.id dice1 finds a thing on the page that has an ID of dice1. That's the first one. Dice2 is the second one. This method finds a view, finds a generic view. I don't want to treat that as a generic view, though. I want to treat it like an image view. Therefore, I declare my variable to define dice1, dice2 as an image view, and I cast that view as an image view. Again, I know this is going to work because I'm the one that created the XML file, and I made it an image view. So I can confidently tell the compiler, treat this like an image view, because I know it is an image view. If I lied to the compiler and I gave the wrong ID or something like that, it would blow up at runtime because it would say, hey, you told me to treat this like an image view, but it's not an image view. Therefore, I can't do that. So these statements are serving the same role as this. In both cases, we are stuffing in a variable, a pointer, a reference to one of the things on the page. All right? One of the things that are on my screen, one of the views that are on the screen. And why am I doing it? Because now I want to do something with that view. I want to manipulate that view. Up here, what I wanted to do, I wanted to assign to that button who is your on-click listener. Here, what do I want to do? Well, I want to actually set the image contained in that image view. All right? Now, this next little thing's a little tricky piece of code, but what it's doing, dice 1 and dice 2, it is setting the image that belongs in that image view. Think, if you will, of an image view as being like a picture frame, right? You can put any kind of, you can put a lot of pictures in a different in one picture frame, right? So when I set the image resource, effectively what I'm doing is I'm changing the image that's in that frame. All right? Started out with no image in it. Then when I roll it, if I rolled a 6, for example, it would put the image for the 6 dice in there. If I rolled a 2, it would put the 2 in there, and so on. This is the syntax to grab the drawable, all right, that has a name of D followed by the value of the dice. So what is D1 and D2? Well, it's the number of the dice. If I rolled a 1 and a 2, D1 would have a value of a 1, D2 would have a value of a 2. Pardon me? And that's what my images are named. Exactly. My images are named D followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, no. Yeah, it's drawable because that's where we're getting the image from. So if we look in here, there's my images. D1, D2, D3, D4, D5, D6. And it's in the drawable folder. Yeah, I only think I have it defined in one place, so it's going to use that. But if I wanted to, I could take the time to make different size dies that worked under different screen resolutions.
Is that function calls in a row, or is that a call to an object in the function present?
Where are we seeing?
Get resources, get identifier, is that an object call to, or is that a function call, period function call?
Okay.
Like I said, it's been a while since I used Java.
All right. Let's break this down. Let's make the screen a little wider so we can put it all on one line.
Yeah.
All right.
First one said image resource, parentheses, and then the function call inside that.
Yeah. This is a function called setImageResource that's on an image view, dice 1. What is the argument to that function? The argument to that function is this. All right? What is that? Well, there is a method on activities called getResources. All right? That returns a resource object. So whatever we call on that, whatever gets returned, the resource object for that activity, we call getIdentifier for them. So in other words, this method returns an object. We are then calling this method on that object that got returned.
Within that object.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Yep.
In Python, you don't put the parentheses after the object declaration false. So it would just be identifier dot, or get resource dot get identifier dot.
Well, again, I would have to see exactly. Remember, this is a method.
That's true. It's a method that returns.
Yeah, it's a method that returns an object.
Yeah, it's not a declaration.
It's not. Yeah, it's not an attribute of that object. Repeat, please.
I know where it's like the URL, fill in the folder, grab this ID.
More or less, yeah. In other words, and again, I wouldn't expect you to have this memorized, but it wouldn't take long to Google and say, if I know the name of an image that's in my drawables, how do I set an image to that? And I'm sure that's what I did when I did this. All right? And again, you have to just give the name of the image. It's in the drawable folder, and it's associated with this package. So, that's what takes us to that. All right? Questions on this? what if I wanted to add to this? Because I have everything in place, right? I have the spinner, and I have the 2 dice. What if I wanted to display a label to say whether they got it right or not? Let's think that through. What all would I have to do? I'd have to change a bunch of things, right? I won't say I have to change a bunch of things. I have to change a few things. I have to change a few things in a few places. So what all would I need to change to put a label down the bottom here that said whether they got it right or wrong? Okay. All right. First thing I'd have to do is I have to add a text view to the XML. All right. And believe me, I use occasionally I slip and use terminology like that too. So if we look here, whoops, didn't want to do that.
Terminology for people who know.
All right, so what I want to do is add a label to it. Okay. I'm actually cutting and pasting a little snippet of code, so pay no attention to. So I'll put a label in here, in my XML, at the bottom. And layout and all that is correct. The text, I'm not going to have any text in it to start, because this is going to be my results. I'm going to dynamically set the text that says if it's correct or if it's incorrect. Do I need an ID for this? Why should it have one? I'm going to do something with this text box. So my code needs to be able to point to that text box, that text view. So I need to be able to identify what thing I want to point to. So I'll go in here and I'll say Android ID plus ID results. All right. So that adds it to the XML. All right. What do I want to do in, do I have to change anything else? Very good. I want to add, I have to add to my strings because I don't want to hard code you won and you lost, right? I didn't even think of that. Thanks for, yeah. So I'm going to go in my strings and I'm going to put in here, well, not a string array. You possibly could do it with an array, but I'm just going to do 2 strings, and one name is going to be won, and another one is going to be lost. You won, you lost. Okay, so now I have these 2 strings that I can refer to. And they're in the string resource file, so if I wanted to internationalize this or localize it so that it did it for French or Spanish or whatever, I could make another resource file and translate all these terms. Okay, very good. Good call. Good catch. I intentionally forgot it so to see if one of you students was paying attention out there. Yeah, always testing. Yeah. All right, what is next? Okay, and where will I do that?
On the main.
Yeah, and the main activity I have to do something with it. First thing I have to do is I have to see if they won or lost, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to create on click, I'm going to create an integer for the total. I'm going to add those two together. I'm going to get the value for the spinner. All right. Or create a Boolean to say if they won or lost. Okay. I am going to grab a pointer to the spinner. So, B1. Shoot. I'm going to say spinner SP equals spinner find view by ID r.id dot, and what's the name of it? Well, I have to look at my layout. What ID did I give the spinner? I gave it an ID of spin choice. It will be posted to Canvas, right? Spin choice. All right. Ooh, got something I don't like. Got a squiggly. What is wrong with that? Pardon me? Doesn't know what a spinner is. Gee, did I spell something wrong or whatever? Here's where Eclipse comes in handy. If you hover over it, it will say that spinner can't be resolved to a type. So it doesn't know what spinners are. So it gives you actually some quick fixes. And the top one is the real one. I didn't import the spinner class. So I can click that.
Stuff like that just makes me want to slap people when they say that hate. It would have taken all of 5 hours to figure that out if that would not have popped up. I'm like, why is it not?
Okay, so now I can point to the spinner. All right. I got a warning. Why do I have a warning? Well, I've declared the variable, but I haven't done anything with it yet. So it thinks that that's odd. It's not giving me a compile error, right? But it's kind of like, well, why are you making this variable if you're not doing anything with it? All right? Fair question. So now I want to get the value of the spinner. All right? And I want to see the value of the spinner. I want to see if they picked high, medium, or low. All right? I'm sorry, low, 7, or high. All right? And I want to compare that with the roll of the dice. So if they picked low and the total of the dice is less than 7, then they're a winner. If they picked 7 and it's 7, they're a winner. If they picked high and it's more than 7, they're a winner. Any other scenario, they've lost. Okay? The code will be easier to assume that they've lost and test for the winning condition. All right? You could write it either way, but just experience teaches me that this one's going to be easier to write to assume, at least easier in my mind, to write to assume that they've lost and then test to see if they won. So I'm going to go and I'm going to set B1 to false. So I'm going to assume they lost. I'm then going to compare to see if they've picked low and it is low. That is less than 7. So I'm going to say if spinner dot, and our IntelliSense loving fans will see that somewhere down here get select item position equals 0. That means they've picked the first thing on the list. And total is less than 7, then we have a winner. And I can set B1 equal to true. Interesting question. Could I put a bunch of ors in here and or those conditions together? You absolutely could. Is that better? I don't know. All right? Exactly. All right? Now, and the other thing to remember is that clearer code? Is that going to be more confusing? And probably not. So, yes, I could combine all these things with a bunch of ors, and I could get by with just having one if statement. But I'm not going to do that. All right? I wouldn't hold it against you if you did, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to do the same thing for the other two winning possibilities, or if I've picked selection 1 and the total equals 7, equal, remember a comparison, or if the position was 2 and the total was greater than 7. In any of those cases, we have a winner. Otherwise, they've lost. Okay? So now I can put if B1 else all right. Now, what do I have to do? I have to point to that text view, right? So how do I point to a text view? Well, text view results equal text view line view by ID r.id dot, and what did I name it? Yeah. I think I called it results. Results. I can declare the variable anywhere. I'm going to actually put the answer in there after the if statement. But I can declare that variable here.
You want to do it above though, because you call it before it's created. Not still a line by or what is it? Line by line.
Well, I have to declare it before I use it.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Okay. And generally speaking, like if I'm doing things like this, I usually put them at the beginning so that that object is available. All I'm doing is I'm assigning the pointer. I'm not giving it a value yet. Okay. Gee, we have an error. What do you suppose that error is? Doesn't know what text view is. Why not? Because we haven't imported it. All right. So now we want to, well, let's see. So can't I identify it as a... It is results.
It's because you named the variable results too, I bet.
I'll bet it's because I haven't saved this guy.
I think it's if you name the variable itself, the text view itself. So now it thinks you're declaring results as results.
Oh, yeah, it's just not your result.
So you need to take the S off and name the variable.
Now that is not going to have an effect.
No.
It is a timing problem. Let me go and compile this. Yeah. And my error disappeared. It wasn't that I didn't save it, it's that it did not generate that ID yet. So it didn't know about that there was an ID because I had recently added that.
Good example, if you can't figure out what something's wrong, I forgot that'll do that from time to time. Try and compile it.
Right.
Because it may not be an issue.
Right. Okay, so now I have my results. I'm pointing to it. And so I can say, oops, if they won, results dot set text and what I don't want to do is put the hard-coded thing here, right? Because we want to pull the value from that XML file. So that begs a question, how do I pull it from that XML file? Well, pardon me? Let's go and Google it. And let's Google Android get value from strings XML. How to read a value from strings XML. I'm going to copy it and paste it on my laptop. That was brilliant. Yeah. Get resources. Get string. Someone, Ojimaisu, you repoed their computer, or? Oh, okay. Okay, all right. Let me look in the strings file and see what those things are called. Yeah, I don't remember. Won and lost. Okay. So, go up here. All right, and I'm wondering if I'm having the same situation here that I had a minute ago. let's pilot. All right, does not like that. Oh, r.string, not RID. Duh, because it's not a ID, it's a string. All right, we're back to this nonsense again. Let me plug it in. Yeah, you have to get into, you have to set the options to be allowed to be in developers mode for it. Yeah, to allow third-party applications.
In developer mode, you need drivers and recognize all those drivers. Yeah, depending on the phone, a lot of these things. But the first step is to enable the developers mode and then see if there's any drivers for it and all that. If I'm not mistaken, like for example, these, I don't think I downloaded any drivers for. I think it just worked. Well, it's funny because with Mac, it recognizes it.
Right.
Windows computers, drivers to recognize.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I guess, yeah, all my development's been on a Mac. All right. So I pick low, roll the dice. I lost. I'll pick low again. I lost. Pick low again. I lost. Pick low again. Yay, I won.
You did a good job with the statistics part.
All right. So the purpose of the first couple weeks of class is this. All right. Let me explain to you what my goal is for you folks at this point. It's to understand the components that exist within an Android app. And we looked at them. We looked at the resources. We looked at the drawables. We looked at the string resources. We looked at the layout. All right. We looked at the Java code, and we briefly looked at the manifest. So know about those different pieces. Know then about how the main activity, the activity, is sort of what accesses those resources and does stuff with them. So like in this case, we grabbed values from the UI. All right? We put things in the UI. We pointed to a string entry. We pointed to a drawable. So we can do all those things in the Java code. All right? And the Java code, again, is sort of the glue that holds all that stuff together and connects all the different resources into a coherent app. Okay? So we have this. I will post this example today. And then we will look next time at how to refactor this. In other words, okay, we did an okay job. We got it to work. You know, yay, pat ourselves on the back. But this will be the equivalent of like the first draft of a term paper, right? And again, keep in mind that regardless of what is done in practice, every English teacher will tell you that the first draft is probably not the best, that you need to go back and revise it and change it, and you can make it work better. So we'll do that. Yes? You won't really do anything on with a manifest, right?
Start on the GUI and then.
Yeah. Yeah, that would I would suggest that. Yeah. All right. Other questions? Problems? Have a good weekend. We'll see you back on